It's only a few weeks since the 2020 pandemic Olympics were completed. And what I found interesting was the new sports that were included in the 2020 Olympics. There was skateboarding and surfing, there was rock climbing or wall climbing, and there was karate. They also put back in baseball and softball, which they had dropped in the last Olympics. Every time they have the Olympics, they're always adding and subtracting. It always happens like that. It was like that in 1924, when the 1924 Olympics were held in Paris. And in those Olympics, they added the sport of canoeing. And there was a man named Bill Havens who was part of a four-man team that was destined to compete in those Olympics. He had been training hard. And as they got closer to the Olympics, it was discovered that his wife was pregnant. She was going to have her first child. And so Frank was in a quandary. He didn't know what to do because the doctor said that the baby was due just about the time he should be in Paris for the Olympics. And he debated back and forth. Despite his wife's urging that he go, he withdrew from the team and stayed home. That four-man canoe racing team won the gold medal that year. And so, it seemed like a shame, and people said that to Frank, and he said, no. I made a commitment to my wife. As it turned out, the doctor was wrong on estimating when the birth would take place. And there would have been enough time for Frank to take the ship over, compete, and return before their first child was born. And again, people said to him, what a shame, and he said, no, I did the right thing. And he believed that all of his life because the commitment he made was more important than anything else, that commitment to his wife. I mention that because the three readings for change actually kind of have a theme. Doesn't always happen during ordinary time, during the green season. What we have here is the first reading where Joshua, near the end of his life, he's completed his mission. He settled the people in the land of Canaan after their slavery in Egypt. And he gathers them one last time at Shechem, right about the middle of the country. And he gathers them there and he says, you live among people who have pagan gods. And you have to make a decision. What God are you going to give your allegiance to? Which God are you going to be committed to? For me and my family, we will be committed to the Lord, the God who brought us out of the land of Egypt. And many of the people say exactly the same thing, which sounds very nice, except any of us who know the history of the Old Testament know, not so much at all. In fact, it is a story of their failure again and again, despite the judges calling them to faithfulness, despite the prophets calling them to faithfulness. It was always a struggle for them to keep that commitment that they had made to the God who had chosen them as his own. It was always a struggle. In the second reading, we hear Paul compare the mystery of our relationship as the church with Christ. And he talks about it in terms of a marriage, which is really a beautiful image, that we are the bride of Christ Jesus, that we are the one he has chosen to give himself to, and he asks us to give ourselves to him in return. And he uses that image. The language is a little difficult because the Greek doesn't translate as well into English, depending on who's doing the translation. But basically what Paul is saying, just as marriage is self-giving, so the church and our relationship with Christ is one of self-giving. He gave his life for us and to us, and in turn we give ourselves to him. We make a commitment to him that mirrors that commitment of marriage, of loving self-giving. And then in the gospel we have the story of the disciples. It's at the end of the Bread of Life discourse, and the part we didn't hear last week because it was a Feast of the Assumption is Jesus has been talking about himself as being the bread of life, come down from heaven. That just as our Jewish ancestors were fed in the desert with that manna, that strange what's-it bread, that he is the bread of life come down from heaven to feed us on our pilgrim journey through this life. But then in last week's gospel, which you didn't hear, you can go back and look it up in John 6, but he says that he would give us his flesh as our bread of life and his blood as the drink. And in John's gospel, in the Greek, it gets very literal. John says, unless you grind with your teeth the flesh of the Son of Man and gulp down his blood. That's not metaphor, my brothers and sisters. He's talking about a reality. Unless you grind with your teeth the flesh of the Son of Man and gulp down his blood, you have no life within you. And many of his disciples said, oh, geez, bread, flesh, blood, drink, really? Hey, Jesus, been nice knowing you. And they walk away. Because what Jesus asked was too hard. They just couldn't conceive of how he could do that. And I always love the ending of this passage because it always sounds good. Here Peter says, oh, who will we go to? And, it sounds like, just no question at all. I don't think it was that way. I sit there and think that, when Jesus said, and you, will you lead me too? They looked at him and said, Jesus, we have no clue what you mean. It doesn't make any sense to us at all. What you say is way, way beyond our ability. But there's nowhere else to go. You're it. You're it. We're convinced that you're the one. And even though we don't understand you, we're sticking with you. We've made a commitment, and we will be with you. Now, did they do that perfectly? We know that isn't quite true, but that's all right. He's not asking for perfection. He's asking for us to try. And so we hear in these three readings a story of commitment. We tend to think that it's just about the ones who make the commitment. Husband to a wife, us to the Lord. It's kind of a thing of, I give my life to Jesus, and it's just Jesus and me. And we say, no, not at all. No, how short-sighted. No, God never does anything that's simple. Not at all. God didn't do it for a reason. He does things for many reasons. And our commitment is very important because it has an effect. It has an effect on others around us and on the whole history of the world. A good example of that is the story of Bill Havens that I told you at the beginning of this homily. In 1952, in the Helsinki, Finland Olympics, there was a canoe race in that Olympics as well. And one of the competitors was Bill's son, Frank, 28 years old now. And he competed in the Helsinki Olympics, and of course, back in those days, the only thing you got really was newspaper reports, so he had no clue what happened until he got the telegram from his son. And the telegram addressed to Bill said, Dad, I won. I'm going to bring home the gold medal you lost because you stayed at home for my birth. 28 years later, that decision, that commitment still affected the life of Frank. But I'm going to say, my sisters and brothers, all of us who make commitments affect others. The best homilies I've ever heard are couples who love each other and really commit themselves to each other through the good times and the bad. It is an amazing homily that's much, much more effective than anything I've ever said. No, the reality is that our commitments have a ripple effect, and we'll never know to what, how, when our example will touch the lives of others in a way that will enable them, inspire them to live more faithfully, more fully the gift of love. Not just in marriage, but in every aspect of our life. Our faithfulness to the Lord is a homily that preaches that goodness and the effect that it has on our lives. No, 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 no. No, God is never that simple. All of us who are called to live commitments are called also to be an inspiration to others. Whether we know that or not, it doesn't matter. We'll find that out when we stand before the Lord at the end. But until then, we'll just trust his word. That those of us who continue to live out those commitments, whatever they may be, that they're an inspiration to others. I always love, there's a ceremony for the renewal of marriage vows on a significant anniversary. And in that it says, the world has great need of the homily your love for each other proclaims to the world. And I think about that again and again, that the best homilies ever given are not someone who stands here, not the words that are said in church, but the lives lived out there, lives of commitment and faithfulness and love. Those have done more to proclaim the kingdom than any preacher has ever done. And I thank you to all of you who have done that. Obviously, your presence here today is a sign of that commitment. You'll never know the effect of it on the world around us. We'll find that out at the end, and that's okay. We can wait till then. But you need to understand that it means a difference in the world. It makes a difference in the world in a way that truly inspires others. The best homilies I've ever heard have been proclaimed by lives of love.